This episode of The Clear Out was recorded on the 21st of September 2022 at home in Wicklow. And in it, I discuss the things that we find upsetting and how we can try and learn to handle more, how it's in our interests to be able to handle the stuff that we find confronting. So broadly speaking, the theme of today's episode is about resilience and the cultivation of that resilience, the cultivation of the I can and things will get better. I throw some woke analysis into the mix, a bit of a counter argument to woke ideology that I don't think is... because I think woke ideology is not helping our resilience broadly. I also discuss the nature of time and time passing and how we step forward into the future and where mindfulness is in the mix. And there's also time at the end of the episode to spend a few minutes discussing Lawrence of Arabia, the 1962 David Lean masterpiece, and I try and shoehorn that into a context of resilience and suffering and mental health. So that's it. That's what's coming up. I can't think of anything else. Have a listen. I hope you like it, and I hope you're feeling more positive and more capable on the other side. Okay, cool. I'll see you around the corner. Cheers.
Not gonna change my mind, leaving the dream behind.
Hi, my name is Dara Clear, and you're listening to The Clear Out. How are you? How are things? I've got the heater on. Got the heater on now. That either means I'm a wuss or it's objectively cold, and the truth, as always, is probably somewhere in the middle. I've also got a wheat bag on my shoulder, one of those lovely little wheat bags that you can heat in the microwave. You know you're getting old when you just stand up or you just turn your head to look out the window and something in your body spasms or breaks or snaps or yanks or jerks, and you're thinking, hold on a second, I actually did an entire stretching routine this morning and it hasn't saved me. So yeah, I'm not going to sit in the cold while I record this and further impact my challenged body. I managed to pull some weird muscle across my shoulder. It's nothing serious. Everyone relax. Don't go grabbing your car keys and jumping in your car to rush down here to #blessed to give me a cuddle or a massage or just an embrace, a warm embrace. They embraced warmly. But yeah, isn't it funny? I know it's been topical for the last few episodes. I keep mentioning the change of seasons, but it is very evident the pinch that's happening. My daughter was trying to work out yesterday if the days were getting longer or shorter. So I said, well, what do you think? Think about what the summer days were like. Think about what's coming. What direction are we moving? What are winter days like? What are the days going to be like around Christmas? So we eventually got there. The mornings are darker. I'm heading out in the dark to do my morning routine, which hasn't been as vigorous over the last few months. Over the summer, I've dropped the conditioning part of my routine. I've really been focusing on qigong and tai chi and stretching. And it's probably because I've been doing building work for the last 2.5 months. So I'm sort of getting the conditioning through through building work, lifting blocks and mixing concrete and cement and moving timber and that kind of thing, and handling tools all day long. So but I want to reinstitute the conditioning part of my routine, because I miss it, and it's amazing how easy it is to fall out of a habit like that, because especially a habit that requires effort. These healthful habits that I've referred to regularly over the lifetime of the pod. Anyway, here we are again. A week has gone by. Some of you, and my wife, I include my wife in the some of you, took in the Queen of England's funeral. I didn't myself. I passed by the screen, the TV, a couple of times the other day. My wife was watching it. I think she was watching a replay of the whole thing. I was like, I can't believe you're watching this. Anyway, such pageantry. Such a throwback. Redolent of the halcyon days of the empire. And as I said, or as I speculated in last week's episode, what a phenomenal outlay of money when so many subjects of the crown are struggling to survive. There's a real grotesque aspect to it, and yet I recognise that on some level people are boosted by an event like that, boosted by the celebration, boosted by the theatre, boosted by the display, the ceremony, the tradition. There's a cultural affirmation, although I'm not alone in thinking that the future is unclear. The future of what that national identity will be, and how central or not the royal family and monarchy will be to the British identity is unclear. It's nebulous. It's murky. So anyway, best of luck to those multimillionaires. So the clear out. If you're new to this little venture, this projet, as they say in France, the clear out is all about explorations of wellness. It's about wellness with attitude. The attitude part is, let's not get too precious. Let's not get too woo. Let's try and keep things pretty real. Let's not be afraid to laugh at ourselves. But let's also not be afraid to own our shit. That's my shit. That's your shit. I'm going to own mine. I'm not going to move my shit over to your pile and pretend it's your shit. Okay? That's a central tenet of my philosophy of being well. Own your own stuff. Sometimes you'll need a bit of help. You might need a bit of help to unpack that. You might need a bit of help shifting it, moving it, getting perspective on it. But it is your stuff. It doesn't matter who may have helped that stuff get there, who may have triggered you, who may have traumatized you, impacted you. Unfortunately, at the end of the day, you're the one who's carrying it. You have to deal with it. And that can feel very unfair at times. And life can be unfair. Life can be cruel. And I was thinking earlier about this idea of what life should be like, what life is meant to be like. And it's a sort of a nonsensical idea, isn't it? Life is just life. Life is... It's just we're just these little things scrabbling around the planet trying to survive, and it's a good question. Who lays out the template? Who gives us our understanding, our instinct for what life should and shouldn't be? It really, it's all academic, isn't it? Because it doesn't change what the reality is. And at the moment, it would seem across many parts of the world, there's a serious squeeze being applied in so many areas of life, but particularly economically, particularly in terms of energy, particularly in terms of access to good healthcare, particularly in areas relating to housing. And it's hard, if you think about these things, it's hard not to feel that life shouldn't be like this. Life is meant to be different. We shouldn't be struggling so much just to survive. But that's always been the case. There's always been struggle, and maybe now, for want of a better phrase, the developed world, the modern Western world, what used to be called the first world, maybe it's really, generations of unhindered consumption are finally coming home to roost. And of course, the conflict between Ukraine and Russia, that's definitely had an impact. The pandemic has definitely had an impact. But what can we do? What can we do to square away those difficulties, those larger challenges? What can we do to offset them? What can we do to come to an accommodation? What can we do to create a better headspace? Or what can we do to cultivate a toughness or a resilience that is aligned with a certain amount of positivity? Because I do believe that they are very important tools. We don't want to just collapse. We don't want to just be overwhelmed. And there's no question that many, many people are experiencing those feelings. And phrases like, it's all just too much, or I just can't handle it, or I don't know what to do, I don't know how to survive this. They're very, very, very bleak scenarios. And yet, my belief is we can survive these things, and we can find a way through. Now, maybe for the first time in recent times, we need to think a bit more broadly. We need to think a bit more in a more complex way. We need to think about more systemic approaches. We need our public representatives to do better. We need to think in more communal ways, and think about cross society or cross community approaches to sort of to edification, to sort of raising ourselves and strengthening ourselves. And really I suppose what does that look like in reality is getting into places that aren't comfortable, and sticking your head up and looking for ways to be involved, looking for ways to start ventures in your community. And by the way, I have to say, I'm not filled with those impulses myself. I find it very challenging even thinking about that. I mean, I would argue that what I try to do on the podcast is in this territory of trying to contribute something positive. In my case, it's dialogue driven. It's about thinking. It's about sharing. It's about storytelling. It's about asking questions. And yes, there's a certain amount of advocacy, I suppose, that comes with everything I'm trying to do on the Clear Out. Just by trying to engage with now, and engage with this moment. And of course there's a mindfulness that comes with that, and I might only have a couple of moments a week where that level of mindfulness is something I'm applying directly. The podcast is one of those moments. When I teach Tai Chi, Qigong, that's another time. Maybe when I'm teaching karate as well, it's a different mode, and it's a different dynamic. But I think all of this stuff helps. I think all of this stuff contributes to that resilience and positivity that I was talking about earlier. I was thinking about this in terms of, and I know this comes up again and again and again, and I'm not banging some political correctness or a political correctness drum, but I know I do refer to the culture wars and identity politics and the woke movement for semi-regularly. It's not always the main focus here, but I would be very concerned that there's something about the type of sensitivity that is being advocated and cultivated via woke ideology. My fear is that is making people far less resilient than they could be. Now, as I've discussed before, I discussed this in one of the earlier episodes of the podcast, probably last summer. I have no issue whatsoever with somebody standing up and making their case and saying, historically, this has been my experience, an experience of injustice or discrimination or an absence of representation. And I particularly have no issue with somebody saying that when I have no insight into their experience, when I don't share their experience, when there are very salient factors relating to nationality or skin colour or religion or sexuality or gender identification, whatever it might be. And this idea of intersectional exclusion or intersectional discrimination, whereby it's not just one thing, it might be a combination of things. Not only are you gay, but you're also black and you're also a woman. And so there's three areas where you're coming up against the shutout, the closed door, the gatekeeping. I've no issue whatsoever with anyone standing up and going, this hasn't felt right for a long time and I'm taking a position now and I want better treatment, I want fairer treatment. That for me is not woke. That for me is asserting yourself. That for me is standing up and saying, I'm not going to take this anymore, and calling bullshit on bad behaviour. Now, I think that's admirable, actually. But where we get into trouble, I think, is where a woke ideology tries to completely, and this is the sort of the contradiction within that way of thinking. Woke culture tries to homogenize everything. So everything is validated. Everything and everyone is validated. And it's completely unrealistic. And particularly when this is applied to people who say inappropriate things. And again, inappropriate, a completely subjective term. When people say something that triggers other people, when people are being, saying something that might be sexist or racist or ableist or ageist or whatever ist you want to stick onto it. When people want to erase the record or go back and re-evaluate and reassess existing cultural texts, be they books or songs or movies, can particularly come into this, and they throw out history, they throw out the contemporaneous context, and there's nothing subtle, there's nothing measured, there's nothing thoughtful about the approach, and it's got a horrible ideological rabid zeal about it that is really sits side by side with things like Kristallnacht and the Nazis, burning books, fanatical fundamental Christians burning, breaking records, or burning books, whatever. That extreme sense of righteousness that sets fire to everything, and doesn't bring in grey areas, doesn't bring in consideration. It's just, yay, let's do this thing. And the analogy I think of really is it's like a forest fire. A forest fire doesn't, once it gets going, it doesn't stop when it comes across some nice trees that it wants to save. It doesn't stop when it comes across a little family of, I don't know, let's put ourselves in Australia for a second. When it comes across a family of koalas or echidnas. Do echidnas live in forests? I've no idea. What's an echidna, mate? An echidna is a very cute little, I'm sure it's another marsupial, because most of these extraordinarily interesting, curious looking mammals in Australia, so many of them are marsupials. But the forest fire doesn't stop and go, oh, no, hold on, lads. Hey, speaking to the flames, lads, hold on, back up. Everyone to the right. Yeah, we're going to need to shift about 20 metres to the right, and then we can get cracking again. Once it's going, it just destroys everything. And I was thinking about this. Not only I think does this, can I apply that analogy to woke ideological zeal, but I was thinking about it recently in terms of mental health, in terms of I've spoken a little bit about my own anger at times and aspects of how I experience depression, which can be very self-negating, a lot of self-loathing in the mix when a depressive episode gets a hold of me. And when I was younger, I used to exacerbate that experience by sort of by taking a match to it and inflaming it, because I'd be so angry with myself for being depressed, so angry with myself for not staying in good form and staying positive and staying hopeful and motivated, and I'd just compound my negative state of mind by just piling judgment onto myself, and I've sort of eliminated that element from how I process a depressed state, and I don't do that. I haven't done that for many years. But the forest fire analogy works there as well, because you sort of, like, my experience was I'd set everything alight, everything gets burnt down, and yeah, I completely destroy the landscape, and it's a very massively destructive thing, as a forest fire in reality is, and all that's left behind is scorched earth. I remember a friend of mine sharing with me his own experience, and I think it came up in therapy, of how he viewed himself, and I think he said it was like a bomb site, his inner landscape. So yeah, there's a bit of I think a bit of crossover and maybe a bit of relatability there. If you're someone who has any experience of that kind of emotional headspace, or, I mean, I don't know, would you describe it as being as mental unwellness? It's definitely a periodical unwellness. It's a response. That's really how I view it. It's a response to something. And that idea of how we respond, I think, is really, really important. How we respond to everything we experience in life, but particularly things that we find challenging, particularly things that we find confronting. How we respond is, I think, it's central to our success and failure. And again, success and failure are very subjective terms. But I suppose I think of it this way. Adverse events, difficult events, difficult circumstances, confronting circumstances, a confronting world. Can you proceed on your journey, or do those events stop you in your tracks? And it may be very unimaginative of me, and I've spoken about this before, but I often think in a very linear way, and I do think chronologically, and I do think life is a very linear journey. And I know there's probably 77 quantum physicists who want to disabuse me of that notion and explain alternative times, and I'm already lost. I mean, I already have nothing to add to that to that tangent, but that's how I perceive life. It's endless forward momentum, whether we like it or not, and I think it's partially the entrenched conditioning that so many of us have around the concept of time and the passing of time and the marking of time that starts so young. My daughter's she'll be 9 next month, but she's already very tuned into the 7-day week and school and the weekend, and sometimes she's waking up on a Sunday morning and she's already like, oh, it's Sunday. Oh, there's so little to look forward to. I'm like, whoa, Nelly, hold on, come on. This is starting a bit early. So it's yeah, it's a horrible thing. I mean, I remember that as a kid as well. That Sunday night feeling, the end of the weekend. And I mean, I didn't really have an issue at school. I quite liked school, but even still, um, I don't know. Sunday mornings I still love. Sunday evenings. It depends. Of course, it all depends what you're doing in your life, doesn't it? But yeah, but we're conditioned. We're conditioned early on to tick off the days, tick off the weeks, tick off the months, turn the pages on the calendar, and it's how we mark our, marking anniversaries, marking events, marking festivals. The impact on that is, I think it's almost unavoidable that we aren't aware of time and aren't aware of the passage of time. And of course that does change. It changes as we age. I think we become more aware of the finite nature of what we've been given. And there's also the unpredictable nature of what we've been given. Because as you get older, people go, people die, people pass. You lose them, some much sooner than you would have expected. And as you age and you watch parents age, that's definitely it's definitely a sort of a harbinger. Harbinger doesn't sound like a good word. Harbinger of mortality. Sorry, another one of those words I always question in my head. And yeah, there's no question. I mean, I'm textbook middle age now, late 40s, and there's definitely a squeeze that comes there where you realize, whoa, the good times, the good times may have gone. Or certainly the times when I felt far more bright and cheery about my prospects. And I don't want to overstate that. I'm grand, don't worry. But very different headspace compared to 20 years ago, which is as it should be. And on some levels, on some very important levels, personally speaking, I'm in a much better place than in one of the best places I've ever been in a way in my life, in terms of my own peace with myself and my sense of my own capacity to live a good life. Now that hasn't translated into what was that? That's a falling instrument. That hasn't translated into that was a sign. Be careful before you speak. That hasn't translated into anything resembling abundant wealth or abundant success in maybe the conventional sense of that. But yet again, another one of those subjective terms. I think to be at peace with yourself is, and again, that's not 100% of the time, but it's an awful lot of the time. I think that's a great definition of wellness and success, in terms of being able to live with yourself. So further to that, this idea then of how we respond to difficulty is, I think, hugely important. And if the world is in a particularly shaky moment, which I believe it is, and certainly if you're meeting the world through media and through social media, as much as you can find videos of kittens which make you feel warm and fuzzy, or videos of dogs being funny, really a lot of what we're consuming is pretty pretty alarming stuff. But again, that's the media. That's the media lens, and it's also how a lot of people use social media to express their own alarm, their own existential crisis, their own frustration, their own cries for help. And as I spoke about this not that long ago, we've got to be careful. I believe we, and when I say we, I mean me, and I mean you, us. We have got to be careful about what we consume. Be careful about what you take in. That also affects your sense of resilience, your sense of what can be survived, and it affects your base state, it affects your equilibrium. So choose carefully. I certainly feel, as much as social media can occasionally be an enjoyable diversion, it doesn't take very long for me personally to go, I need to put this phone down and walk away. That might only be 10 minutes. 10 minutes of, looking at whatever, cats and martial arts videos. But the thing is, how we respond to things is very much connected to that base state. It's very much connected to our core feeling, and our core feelings, and our core sense of, I have some resources here to deal with stuff. And I think that is really important, because if we can't cultivate or nurture a sense of resilience, a sense of toughness that sits in a fairly calm place. It's not about being outwardly tough. It's not about being outwardly resistant or outwardly aggressive. It's not about pointedly shutting out the world, because I don't think that's a healthy choice either. I mean, our objective surely is to be in the world and to live in the world and to find the path that allows us to be engaged, that allows us to be well within the landscape of the world, even if that landscape is extremely brittle, even if that landscape is extremely challenged, even if it's shrill, even if it's falling apart. It's on us to be maybe, and maybe this speaks to my own personal philosophy, and it's maybe you don't care for me to advocate this, but perhaps it's on us to be a stabilising element in that. If you choose to believe you have a role to play, if you want to, it's not about responsibility, it's not about saving the world or fixing the world, but it's about recognizing, well, whatever I do, on whatever level I do it, it's contributing somewhere. It's contributing to the larger dynamic, the larger energy. And if I'm conducting myself in a way that is calm, that is considered, that is thoughtful, that is not hysterical, that is not full of rage, that is not full of panic, that is not hyper reactive. I think that's a more positive. The chances of you contributing something more positive are greater. And to to bring this back then to what I was talking about before about woke ideology and the desire to make everything smooth and harmonious, smooth and inoffensive, I suppose is a better word to use there. And that's a big part of this, you know. Are you offended? Are you offended? Have you been triggered? Have you been activated by something you've seen, something you've read, something someone said? And then you want to control those narratives. You want to control those images. Just think about that for a second. Think about how unreal that aspiration is. Think about how that aspiration borders on insanity. How it borders on megalomania. To want to control the narratives. To want to control what's said, what people can and cannot say. Now, I just think what that's going to do is, and I mean, I think it's already doing it, it creates a pressure. It creates an unnatural pressure that pushes all those, all that energy, that energy that is challenging to you, that different voice, the voice that you find offensive, it's going to push it somewhere else. And it pushes it into, anytime anything gets suppressed, repressed, shut down, it doesn't disappear. It doesn't vanish. It has to go somewhere. And when something is no longer permitted, no longer tolerated, that becomes and again, I mean, I'm stumbling here a little bit because, I mean, I recognize that there's that the argument is more sophisticated than this, and it's more complex than this, because when we're talking about things that are identifiable as being harmful to others in a very real way, very dangerous to others in a real way, that there's true injustice, and something that really truly does need to be redressed socially, culturally, governmentally, economically, that's in a different territory. But if we're basically saying, I want everyone to think like I do, that is nonsensical. It's nonsensical, it's childish, it's absurd. And you could even go further and say, even to just want everyone to just never say the things that I don't want to hear is also nonsensical. But what we do need is, and again, I'm repeating things I've said before on the pod. What we do need is a much greater level of discourse and a greater level of honest, open conversation. And until people can find a way not to be triggered and not to live permanently in this highly heightened emotional state of hypersensitivity, where the emotional response is what's being validated constantly at the expense of rigorous, engaged, honest discourse, well, there's no way forward for us at all. None. It's again, it just becomes an echo chamber, but that doesn't help anyone. There's no edification in that. There's no growth in that. There's no evolution in that. It's just another club. And, you know, all clubs are susceptible to that danger. the danger of descending into a mutual appreciation society, and to succumb to the delusion of superiority. And then there can be, it's a form of elitism, but there's no oxygen in it. There's no oxygen. There's no life. The second everyone's agreeing that this is the place to be, it stagnates, it locks, it fixes, and there's no longer any movement. And that's one of my personal obsessions. Is I hope as I age that I can retain a certain mobility of mind, a certain flexibility of thought and flexibility of opinion. And it's not to be a fence sitter or a dilettante or a faddist, but it's to remain receptive, to the ideas of others, to remain open as much as I can. And it's not to be open without judgment. It's not to be open without criticism, but it is to be open. Because I think there's a greater chance for longevity. I think there's a greater chance for emotional wellness. I think there's a greater chance for intellectual rigor, and a sort of an intellectual spryness, I suppose, that everything complements everything else. Because I think the emotional state, the intellectual state, and the physical state, they're all interconnected. They all bounce off each other and feed into each other, and that comes back again to this idea of how do we respond? How do we respond to what we find confronting? How do we respond to what we find challenging? It's in our interests to face that stuff and to investigate it, to examine it, to process it, and to look at our own resources. And sometimes there's no question we're going to need help. There's no question we're going to need to reach for the professionals. We're going to need that therapist, that psychologist, that psychiatrist. We may need that medication. We're going to need the help. But there are so many other things we can do if we're not at that stage. If we think, no, I think I can do this myself, or I certainly think I can begin the process of investigation, begin the process of understanding, and begin the process of solution making or solution finding. And that may have elements to do with sleep. It may have elements to do with diet. It may have elements to do with time management, energy management. It may have to do with elements of time alone, reflective time to, if not meditate, just to sit and be still. It may have to do with trying to journal. There may be elements of finding the right friend or family member to talk to have a cup of tea with or a cup of coffee with, and just a chat. And certainly I don't know how true this is. There's a lot of stuff out there about, I feel I see things again and again about men needing help, and I've contributed to this conversation myself. I did a long podcast at the start of this year about the crisis of broken masculinity. But this idea that, and it's the total stereotype, it's the total cliche about men and male behaviour and male impulses, that men won't ask for help. or women find more meaning, not just in their careers or their vocations, but also in relationships, in their personal relationships and their family relationships, and men apparently much less so. I'm not sure of that, but then I suppose I've been the male friendships that I've cultivated over my lifetime. Most of those men that are, and many of them are still very good friends after 20, 30, 40 years, are emotionally intelligent, emotionally available, emotionally switched on men, interested in their family, good fathers, good partners, guys who can talk about things. And certainly I've benefited enormously over the years from having those people in my life. And still, that said, I still have moments in my own personal struggle, at different times when I'm having personal struggles, where I might hesitate to reach out, because my first point of attack, if you will be to look at myself and go, hold on a second. If I was to sit down in a professional space, what am I looking for? Like what am I actually seeking? Am I seeking validation? Am I trying to be given a plan? Am I just looking for a sounding board? And I try to systematically kind of go through what that looks like and go, well, hold on, am I in a position to find some of those answers for myself? And it's not that I have a resistance or a reluctance to seek professional help. And in fact, I'd even say I'm strongly considering returning to therapy at this point in my life, because I think it could be a very useful juncture to do so. Even if it's only for a short period of time, I feel I would benefit from that. But I do think we often have more resources than we realize, but it's about stopping and being still and doing that personal inventory. But it does require, maybe that's a muscle that requires a bit of practice, flexing it, exercising it. And I've probably been doing that indirectly and directly, I suppose, through a lot of the things I've done over the last 10, 15, 20 years, maybe through different things I've done as a teacher, as a martial arts instructor. Certainly stuff I've done on the blog, theclearout.com, and the pieces I wrote there, and certainly what I'm continuing to do here on the podcast. So I don't know. I mean, I was trying to decide whether I'd throw out the cliche in today's episode of whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And I heard a bit of pushback on that idea recently. I mean, it is a cliche, and you can kind of throw it out there and go, well, I survived it and I'm still here. Therefore, I've got renewed strength, or therefore I had sufficient strength to survive that thing. Therefore I am now stronger. And maybe sometimes that's true, but I think there's a context to that. Like, I think there's a context to facing into what you know is going to be a difficult time and bearing down and gritting your teeth and going, this isn't going to be easy, but I'm going to do it and I will get to the other side. And that's bringing an awareness and a sort of consciousness to the difficulties that lie ahead. Now that's actually quite different. That's very different. And I mean, I would say there's, like, within karate training or a lot of traditional martial arts training, within a lot of sports training, like if you turn up for a rugby training session, as my brother Danny would, and you know you're going to get whacked. You know there's going to be some tackles put in. You know you're going to be dumped on the ground. You know you're going to walk away from that pretty sore. But he goes into that knowing that's what's ahead. And you're volunteering for that adversity. And in traditional martial arts, you volunteer for a lot of adversity. And in that situation, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. You're building that resilience. You're building that toughness. You're building the body. You're building the mind. You're also, and maybe this is understated or under-advertised, you are building emotional resilience, emotional toughness. Because often that's one of the biggest things you have to face with contact sports, combat sports, martial arts, is fear. The fear of being hit, the fear of being hurt, the fear of being humiliated, the fear of not being strong enough, not being fast enough, not being tough enough. And some of the most gratifying moments that I've experienced in karate as a practitioner, but maybe more so as an instructor, is seeing people face those fears and overcome them. Seeing people face the fears and push through them and negotiate that emotional challenge. And that's hugely gratifying as an instructor, to think you may have contributed to that person's sense of that sense of I can actually overcome this. And that's a huge part of what many teachers do, regardless of the subject, the setting, regardless of conventional education or sports or coaching. That is I think that's one of the greatest gifts a teacher has, is that being able to turn on that switch in a person's mind, in their sense of self. I can. I mean, if you've done that for one person, that's a life-changing dynamic. Even if it's only for one event, one test, one problem in the maths copy. I don't know. That's a great thing. So you think, come back to ourselves. You come back to what we face in our adult lives, what we face in terms of how we're looking at the world and how we're looking at what can be dumped on us. And this comes back to then the idea of the adversity that we can't plan for, the adversity that we didn't know was coming, the toughness that we didn't know was coming. See, in that situation, yeah, I'm advocating we've got to try and cultivate this sense of I can survive this. I will survive this. I have resources. When the chips are down, I'll find a way. And I definitely have a lot of that in me naturally. And maybe that's been informed by 30 years of karate practice. Maybe it's been informed by dealing with my own stuff. I don't know. But I definitely look to the future, and it's funny, my bar is very low. So I'm not thinking upwards. I can become this great whatever actor, podcaster, what karate instructor, wellness advocate. I'm never thinking that way. I'm usually thinking very much the other way. When I run out of work, when nobody wants to pay me to do anything, I'll find a way to survive. I'll get that dinner on the table. I'll get the fuel for the fire. I'll find a way. That's usually where my sense of wellness and my sense of confidence in myself is located. It's usually located in the worst of times. This will be survivable. But to return to the idea of whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and let's go to the other side of that, which is it may not kill you, but it may endlessly weaken you. It may endlessly compromise you. It may endlessly darken the light, and it may endlessly erode your sense of possibility. Now, I'm not saying that to be negative. I'm not saying that to be bleak. But let's not kid ourselves. Some people get dealt very tough hands. Some people, it's attrition right from the start. Or some people find themselves in a sequence of unforeseen events that are relentlessly brutalizing and punishing. And something does get killed, something does die, and it might be. And this, this area. I mean, ultimately, you can put that into different contexts. It could be socioeconomic, just growing up with very little, growing up in an impoverished, disenfranchised part of your country, your community, your town. Generational poverty, generational lack of opportunity, and that is not nothing. And I know the Thatcherites among us, maybe the Petersons, the Jordan Petersons among us will say, well, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, girl or boy or whatever, and take charge of your life, and that's no excuse. Look, there are always going to be people who transcend circumstances. There are always going to be people who transcend shitty circumstances. And that could be that, and that doesn't have to be the cliche of what I just described. Oh, well, they're from a poor background. Oh, it's a class issue. Oh, no one in their family ever went to university. No one ever finished high school, secondary school, whatever. It doesn't have to be that. And I mean, it's an offensive stereotype in its own right, because of course, I'm not even going to go there. But many people transcend their circumstances. So many people transcend their circumstances and live good, full and fulfilled, enriched lives. And they punched through. They punched through the childhood. They punched through the disadvantage. They punched through the trauma. But many people don't. And that's just as real as anything else. As much as we want to, wish it away, sometimes life just does people in, and it is what it is. And it's not what life is meant to be. It's not what we'd like life to be, but it is what it is. And there are pathways out there. If you're the type of person who goes, no, I want to make a difference in a much more direct, cold-faced way. That's why people become social workers. That's why some people become teachers. That's why people become therapists and counsellors, and why they become health professionals. Maybe that's why, I'm hesitating. Maybe that's why some people become politicians. I don't know. But you ask yourself again, or I'm asking you, look at your own response system. Look at how you choose to respond to what's in front of you. Because you will be tested. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I imagine if there was some miraculous calculator that we could just go boop, boop, beep, boop, boop, and it could show us a percentage of people who haven't had to deal with anything. People who haven't had to face anything. People who have had no difficulties. I'm guessing that's a pretty small percentage. And it doesn't matter, because, again, we can think very conventionally in terms of financial comfort, privilege, another subjective term. Humans, we have a way. We find a way to feel hard done by. We find a way to locate that sense of injustice, that sense of we've been wronged, that sense of I've had a raw deal. And sure, I'm laughing a little bit as I say that, but this just shows you like the subjective nature of experience. And as I've said before, the idea that you could ever dare to speak for anybody else's experience, it's I find that offensive. You have no idea. We have no idea. We have no idea what anyone else has been through. None whatsoever. We just don't know. And the audacity to presume we can say this group of people is like this, that group of people is like that, all women are like this, all black people are like that, all transgender people are like this, all men are like that. It's just embarrassingly stupid. Embarrassingly stupid. And the sooner we recognise the endless possibilities of the human experience, the endless possibilities of, and I'm going to return it just to suit my own interests today, the endless possibilities of what story can be told by whom, and how that story doesn't speak for everyone, that story may only speak for one individual character that could be fictional, and not to get triggered, not to get so alarmed. And I've been, this has been a little thing that's been scratching at the back of my brain since the middle of July, when I put out an episode focusing on the films Vertigo by Hitchcock and Betty Blue, the French movie from what was it, the late 80s? Was it? I've forgotten now. I only did it a couple of months ago. But I was looking at those movies in terms of how craziness in love and craziness in relationships, and what the French call amour fou, how that's depicted in movies. And I was discussing the plot of Betty Blue, and I was breaking down the end of the movie, and I used the word, maybe I didn't use the word, but I certainly expressed the sentiment that the end of Betty Blue was problematic, because the male lead ends up suffocating Betty Blue in her hospital bed after she's self-harmed, and he decides that her brain has gone, and she was this sort of mad, sexpot, vivacious, irrepressible young woman that he sort of became obsessed with and fell in love with, and she became his muse, and she was championing his work. And at the end, he suffocates her in her hospital bed in a mental institution, and very casually in the final scene sits down to continue writing in his room. And there was something about that casual. I just dispatched my girlfriend, my mentally distraught girlfriend, to the hereafter, and now I'm going to spark up a cigarette, pet a cat, and sit down to continue working on my novel. That is what I was describing as being problematic, and it didn't sit well with me afterwards. I thought, well, what am I trying to say here? Is this movie trying to say something about writers? Is it trying to say something about men? Is it trying to say something about women and the male obsession with sex, or trying to possess the highly sexualized woman? Is there something being commented upon about the reduction of a woman's utility to her sexuality, and when that becomes broken in this case, what's the point of having her around anymore anyway? And we can extrapolate, we can draw out that theorizing, we can draw out that critique, but I don't know if that actually makes it problematic. I mean, the use of that word problematic, for me now, that's a woke buzzword, and it's a way of avoiding the conversation. It's a way of looking at things and applying this woke morality onto something, imposing it onto a story, imposing it onto fictional characters. And I question the value of that. It doesn't, there's, like, and maybe this is just a semantics issue, maybe it's just language. So I mean, yeah, be critical, look at something and go, okay, be critical. But I tell you what, if we start making stories, TV shows, whatever, TV shows, movies, particularly where we see, human life reflected back at us, so with such kind of verisimilitude, where we go, yeah, well, that's us. If we take out all the lumps and bumps and everybody is just behaving in a way that is across the board tolerant, and no one faces any adversity, and everybody behaves wonderfully with this amazingly aligned moral compass, that's going to be really dull art. There'll be no friction. There'll be no drama. Now, I know we can talk about an evolution of storytelling and an evolution of representation, and stories will shift to something else, perhaps. I don't know, but I don't know. I mean, we've been telling the same stories for as long as stories have been told, have we not? Don't all our stories come back to the same things? And I mean, I'm gonna get stuck. I'm in danger of going down a rabbit hole here of what storytelling is, what it can be, what stories need to be told. But we've got to be wary. If our stories are driven by moral rectitude, if our stories are being driven by a desire to right the ship, it's not very organic, is it? It's not coming from a place of pure storytelling. It's not coming from a place of the human impulse to tell stories, to understand the world. It's really doctrine and dogma and prescription. And is that what you want? I go to the chemist for my prescription, or I get my prescription from a doctor. I don't go to the cinema for that. I don't watch movies for that. So I don't read books for that. So it really is something I think we've got to watch out for. And just again to and I'm going to finish with this today. I was watching on Netflix last night. There's a little tiny series on Netflix. I think it only has like 4 or 6 episodes. It's called Voir. That's VOIR. Voir, or voir. Voir, the French word to see, the verb to see. And they're basically short cinema essays, 20 to 25 minutes long. And I watched one episode last night, and it was an American, I don't know if he's a movie critic, but someone who watches movies anyway. And he was talking about this idea of protagonists in movies that we don't like. So unlikable protagonists, and how central they are to movies and to movie storytelling, and how they don't need to be likable to make the movie good. And he looked at a lot of different movies, but the starting point, and the movie he said was his favourite movie that he always tries to watch and always tries to bring people to see at least once or twice a year, is Lawrence of Arabia. And that certainly at different times in my life, and particularly in my 20s, I used to cite Lawrence of Arabia as one of my favourite movies, if not my favourite movie. And I was lucky enough to see it in the early 90s in its restored version in the cinema, and it clocks in at whatever it is, nearly it's just over 3.5 hours long. And I was aware of it as a young sort of movie buff. I was very much aware of these David Lean epics. Lawrence of Arabia was 1962, written by, now I was going to say Thomas Bolt, is it Robert Bolt, who also did A Man for All Seasons. I loved it, and just seeing it in that show last night reminded me of how much I loved it. And it's a film that sometimes gets dismissed as being, one of those, these kind of lengthy, tedious epics from the 60s, and that coincidentally has no women in it. Although I feel there is a sequence, isn't there, at some point where there are women ululating before men go into battle, set as it is in North Africa. But Lawrence of Arabia has... So I mean, there's another movie that might get, you can't have that. It needs to be remade, and there needs to be a female character. And two of the key Arab characters are played by non-Arabic actors. I mean, famously, Alec Guinness plays one of them, and Anthony Quinn plays one of the others. And the third is played by Omar Sharif in his young physical prime. And he's an amazing sort of offset to Lawrence, who was played so memorably, so vividly by the young Peter O'Toole, who just looked stunning. The way his eyes explode on the screen, such a beautiful face, astonishing, and he is the sort of certainly in the story of the movie, he's this awkward, maladroit army officer who's in the cartography section, the map making, and he seems to be regarded as somewhat of a joke, and he's sent out to Arabia to meet one of the Arab leaders, and this is during the First World War, and the British Army are trying to see, can we work with these guys? Will they help us in our fight against the Turks? And so what happens is Lawrence sets off and falls in love with the desert. He falls in love with the culture of the Arabs, and falls in love with himself as a leader of men, and falls in love with himself as this facilitator between warring Arab states, and he falls in love with his own myth. And it's never stated explicitly in the movie, but Lawrence is also gay. That was the speculation, and he's this beautiful blonde, blue-eyed man who is absolutely unique amongst all the Arabic men that he is mixing with. And he's gifted the white robes of the Arabs, and so he's an amazing physical counterpoint to Omar Sharif, who's also very striking but wearing black. And typically in westerns, the white hat, black hat idea was the white hat is the good cowboy, the black hat is the bad cowboy. White, virtuous; black, dark and immoral and evil. And in this case, that is not the convention that is being presented to us. And if anything, it's Lawrence who loses his way, and after being captured by the Turks, and I think what we're being led to believe is that he's raped by the Turkish officer in command. Lawrence thereafter because of his humiliation, because of a certain amount of there's an evident masochism in his character as well as presented by Lean and O'Toole. There's something very dark in him thereafter, and even though he's the man in white, you can see Omar Sharif, who's been a great friend to him, his character in the movie, being crestfallen and just unable to process what his friend has become, because a bloodlust has been activated in Lawrence thereafter, which again was something he tapped into earlier in the movie. It's an astonishing movie, and the power of the movie is the love. It's Lawrence's journey of love with the desert, love with what he can be, and maybe the unstated love he might feel for Omar Sharif, and it's David Lean just captured something really magnetic and magical with his visuals, with the extraordinary performance that the movie is built around, in Peter O'Toole. I don't know if it was his first movie performance, but it was very early on. So there is a movie about someone dealing with the world. What could he handle? He had to handle crossing the desert alone. He had to handle the complexity of the Arabic culture and negotiating that. He had to handle the disapproval of the British military and his superior officers. He had to handle his humiliation at the hands of the Turks, and ultimately he didn't survive. Something got killed. So that thing that didn't kill him, it didn't make him stronger. It just made him angrier. It made him more brutal. It made him less caring. And that ties back to the larger theme today of adversity, and at its worst, trauma, brutalizing us and eroding our sense of. I think what it does is it erodes our sense of getting a positive response in return. I think that's that. And what does that become? That becomes a sort of an entrenched cynicism, an entrenched defeatism. And I think, personally, that is something that we have to watch out for. Because once we get to that stage, there's not really much point anymore, because we're not investing in a positive way. We're not investing with true hope and openness. We're investing cautiously. We're investing with half our hearts, and we're just not going to get that. We're not going to get the return that's possible if we do that. So there you go. That's my final bit of advocacy today is invest with a whole heart. Give everything you've got, and give it. And this is key. Give it away and be happy to give it away. And whatever happens, happens. Don't make it transactional. But the less you give, the less chance you'll have of having that positive return. So there you go. Okay, so go and watch Lawrence of Arabia. In fact, do you know what? I might just quickly finish with, there was a nice quote. There's a brilliant review from Roger Ebert, the great Chicago film critic, and in his updated review from 20 years ago, he quotes at the start of his review something Omar Sharif said. Sharif said, if you are the man with the money and somebody comes to you and says he wants to make a film that's 4 hours long with no stars and no women and no love story and not much action either, and he wants to spend a huge amount of money to go film it in the desert, what would you say? So that sums it up. Well, what I would say, if I was the money man and I had some sort of insight into David Lean's vision, I would have gone, here, take everything I've got. I'll actually throw a link to that review into the description of this episode, because it's a fantastic review, really, really, really well written. Roger Ebert, when he got it right, he really got it right. Okay, cool. That's it. Listen, if you like what you hear, you can throw me some love on social media. The Clear Out podcast is on Facebook and Instagram. It's on YouTube. The Clear Out 2, that's the number 2, the digit 2, is on Twitter. You can email me at theclearoutlive@gmail.com if you want to share any thoughts, comments, responses, suggestions. And if you are so motivated that you want to contribute financially to the show and support it in that way, you can do so in 2 different ways. There should be a supporter link in the description of this episode, and there you can make a one-time contribution of whatever size you want. Or if you want to become a regular contributor, a patron of the show, you can use the Patreon link. That's patreon.com/theclearout. And that's a matter of throwing a small amount of money once a month, or twice a month. I don't know what it is, but it's like the price of a cup of coffee. But a regular, ongoing contribution to support the life of this show, this tell, and I'd be grateful for whatever, and in whatever way you can support the podcast, spread the word, I'd welcome it. So there you go. Okay, listen, mind yourselves, take care, stay positive, stay strong, stay resourceful, stay responsive, and I will talk to you again real soon. All the best. Take care. Bye.